So for now, we're going to make a start. I don't know if you've been to one of these panels before. We're going to do a bit of a kind of like discussion, and then we'll open it up to some questions from the floor as well at the end. So if you have any questions throughout, like get thinking, and you'll be able to fire them at the speakers further towards the end. So just a bit of introduction about who we've got tonight. So we've got Eni Aluko, who plays for Chelsea's ladies and plays for England football team. And then we've also got Asha Philip, who is a England sprinter and former gymnast. Both have come up from where they live tonight, so if we can give them a good welcome.
Hi. Oh, I'm on. Perfect.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Okay, so just to start, it might be quite a good idea if you kind of if each of you gave a bit of a summary of your story, kind of where you started out in sport, where you are now, kind of what are the main things that you've learned through your career, that type of thing.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Cambridge Student Union. So I'm Eni Aluko. I play for Chelsea and England national team. How I started playing football, I've played since I was probably 5 years old. Football is one of my earliest memories. And basically, I just started playing in my local area with my brother. And there happened to be a lot of boys in the local area. So there was not many girls growing up. And so football was sort of a form of acceptance for me. I kind of had to fit in and be cool amongst the other boys. And then I realized I was better than all of them. And so I became the cool kid, the cool girl that could play football. So that kind of became my reputation. And again, a way of sort of me feeling part of a group, if you like. So I took that into school. I was the only girl in the boys' team at school, and that kind of, again, was my reputation in school. But it was always quite challenging sometimes because people thought it was a bit odd. But eventually I started playing for a girls' team, and then I got scouted for England about 15, and then was part of sort of organised football system. But women's football sort of 10, 15 years ago wasn't professional, so we had to have sort of other jobs or, go to university. So I went to university, I went to Brunel, did law, became a lawyer, and then full cycle, I became a professional when women's football went professional. So here I am today.
Okay.
Yep.
So when was that you went professional?
Professional, it was after the Olympics. So the Olympics, 2012 Olympics was sort of a watershed moment for women's football, and women's football opened up the Olympics, and I think that's when people woke up to it and thought, oh, this is actually really interesting. And after that, I think a lot of people, a lot of clubs decided to invest professionally, and that's when I decided to become professional.
Okay, perfect.
Hello, I'm Asha Philip. Do you mind my sandals, because they're my mum's bag, my shoes, so please, if you take photos, please, above the waist, that'd be great. So I basically started as a gymnast as a child. Younger than that, I was doing ballet, tap, jazz, and then filtered into trampolining, and as I got better at trampolining, I did double mini trampolining, if anyone's ever heard of that. It's basically I compare it to vaulting in gymnastics. It's a small trampette, though. You run up to it, you do 2 moves on, and you land on a mat. And I basically did that until I was about 17. So while I was near to the end of my career as a trampolinist, I got into athletics, and that's when I found out I could run really fast in a straight line. And then after that, it got to a point where both sports were butting heads, and I had to pick one out of the other. So on my last competition for my double mini trampolining, I was out in Canada and had a nasty accident. I landed quite badly and broke my right knee. I tore all my ligaments. I fractured a bone. My doctor told me at the time, you're one person I would get a year. And he says, you will have to go home and think about. I said, oh God, is it that bad? So he went home and told me I had to have 2 operations, and that was one to put the fracture down, and the other was to reconstruct my whole knee, as in putting the new ACL in and having the whole massive reconstruction. So that kind of made my decision of going from trampolining into athletics. And I've worked extremely hard to get to where I was today. It wasn't easy. I could say I was out for about 3 to 4 years. God knows why I still did it, but I did. And yeah, I'm now a professional sprinter.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so just thinking about the theme of the panel tonight, obviously the issue of kind of gender in sport and women, particularly in sport, is obviously something that's really important. And obviously you were saying how in school you were kind of the cool girl with the boys playing football and that type of thing. And I don't know if you think that whether you were the exception or whether you think that that kind of happens a lot, and whether you think that this whole idea of gender inequality in sport has come as a kind of is rooted in school, if you like?
Yeah, I mean, I think the short answer to your question is no. I was quite exceptional, if you like, and sort of the special kid. And that was a double-edged sword. On one hand, you know, it was kind of what made me stand out. But on the other hand, you know, I remember going to tournaments and coaches would say it's against the rules for me to be playing. And I was 8 at the time. So that was very disturbing for me, because then I thought, oh, I'm really odd, I'm really weird, I'm really, you know, why am I doing this? And it was an identity crisis for me at the time, because it was so different.
Yeah.
Whereas now, if you go into schools, there are so many girls playing football. Football is one of the fastest growing, if not the fastest growing sport in women's sport. So there's been a shift there from when I was growing up to now. And you know, if you come to Chelsea games, there's so many young girls that come into games. So I think in terms of gender identity in sport now, it is much easier for girls to play sort of male-dominated sports like football, like rugby. And certainly there is now a pathway to become a professional. So as I said, when I was on the pathway, it wasn't an option for me to become a pro. I went to university and I, you know, wanted to become a lawyer, and so that was kind of my professional career, and football was a hobby. Whereas now, for girls growing up, they can genuinely look at sort of becoming professional footballers as a potential job. Yeah. I think how that affects the wider sort of gender in sport, I think there has been a huge shift in women's sport. I think if you see now, you turn on the news and it's not odd anymore to see sort of a news story about a woman doing fantastic in her chosen sport, or a women's team doing great in a chosen sport. And on the flip side of that, negative stories, which I've experienced recently, on the sort of front page of Sky Sports News as well. So there has been a huge shift, I think, in terms of women in sport, and it's now become sort of part of normal conversation and psyche.
I don't know if you have any kind of input on that point in terms of in athletics, whether you found that you were limited more than men potentially?
It wasn't much that we were limited. It was more just because the boys shined brighter than us women that we just got pushed aside. We was never, no one would never want to look for the girls first. If it was the 100-meter final, they're going to care about who wins the men's. It's never the women's. So I know things are changing, but then you had like Usain Bolt just go and do what he did. So no matter how good Shelly-Ann Fraser was, and she was from the same country as Usain, that she was never going to be as good as him. Like, she is well known to everyone here, but she's not going to get the same level as respect as Usain did.
Do you think that's partly a problem of the media and the fact that male sport is given so much more coverage in general? Yes,
but for track and field, because it's spread out over the whole week or 10 days anyway, you still wouldn't, it would still be literally just, it would be more men or male dominated. As much as we do have such good women athletes out there, they would draw more to the men, which I don't really understand, because the women are just as good, but it's just difficult. They like to see whoever's up there, they're just going to post stuff throughout the whole time. So we had the World Championships in London recently, and they had like a Bolt countdown. They had a Mo countdown. It's like, okay, so what about us guys? Like, we've been doing well. We've got Olympic medals from 4x1 and stuff. Where's our countdown? But unfortunately, we're just not there just yet.
Is there anything kind of not that we don't see, kind of parts of the sport potentially in terms of funding or what you're given and the opportunities in terms of training. Is there anything there that still kind of favours men, or do you think that's kind of moved on now?
We don't have any difference in our sport. It literally is just a set funding throughout for everybody, unless it's your individual sponsors, and that's different.
Yeah.
Well, that's really good to hear,
Yeah.
because I think straight away that's an equality there, that a female athlete has the opportunity and the grounding to do as well as a man, because on a financial level, straight away you're equal.
Yeah.
In football, I mean, you know, it's astronomical what some of these players are earning. You know, 200 grand a week, some of them. I mean, my Chelsea counterparts, who I see every day, you know, some of these guys are on 200 grand a week, you know, before tax. So, you know, it'd be quite nice to sort of be on that level. But I think what you're addressing is a social construct. I think if you go into banks, law firms, schools, you know, there will be men that are paid more than women, just because that's the way society is. I think in sport, there is more of a conversation around it now, because the argument used to be, well, you know, people are willing to pay more to watch Wayne Rooney or, you know, I don't know, Chelsea play Arsenal than they are to watch Chelsea women play Arsenal women. But actually that's shifted now, because when women's football is now on the TV, particularly with the national team, we're getting 4 or 5 million viewers, even more than the men.
Wow. Yeah.
So now, what's the argument now? And now brands want to get involved because of those viewing figures. So I think we've moved away from that argument now, where you can no longer say the disparity shouldn't be so big. But I think there's always going to be that kind of interest, as Asha said, of, you know, who do you want to see, Usain Bolt or, you know, Jessica Ennis, who are two equally, you know, high-profile athletes. But it's just the way society has sort of trained people to think, in a way.
Would you say, obviously there's lots of campaigns out there, not just for the kind of diminishing the pay gap, but for kind of promoting female participation in sport in general? Are either of you involved in any of those campaigns, and like, how have you been doing that?
Yeah, well, I think everybody loves the This Girl Can campaign. I think, you know, I think that's a campaign that everywhere you go, it was on the tube, it was on the train, it was on TV, and that's the way it should be. It should sort of drip feed into people's psyches, so then when they see a girl play, it's no longer weird. That's how sort of advertising and branding should be. And I think that campaign did a lot for women's sport and female participation. In terms of my involvement, you know, commercially for me as an athlete, I've found it much easier to sort of have deals with brands based on the fact that they want to promote women's sport and they want to have a face to say, we are promoting women's sport, which was not always the case.
Yeah.
So, for instance, I've just joined a campaign with a brand called Sally Hansen. I don't know if anyone knows, but they're an American-based brand that they're sort of big on cosmetics and nails, and their campaign is called Sheetopia, which is all about flipping the sort of world. So if women ran it, how would it be? So it was such an amazing campaign to be part of, because they're just challenging sort of social stereotypes. So it's a lot about if women were in the boardroom and there was only one man, how that sort of conversation would run. If you know, if girls were the dominant party playing football, how would it feel for a boy? You know, and that kind of, this is what we need. We need brands to really challenge those social constructs, so that a young boy who wants to go to a girls' game is not going to get picked on by his mates, because it's just normal.
Yeah. Do you have any kind of campaigns that you've been involved in?
No, but I'd love to.
Yeah.
Honestly, I would. If you watch any of my interviews, probably majority of the time I'll be like screaming all about the girls.
Are you with Nike?
Yeah.
Tell them.
Yeah, but they don't. It's not like, hey, I'm a girl, so we are girls. Like,
Yeah,
forget the guys.
but I think to be fair, I think athletes do have the opportunity to really push brands and really say, look, you know, it's not just about wearing the kit.
Yes.
What can we do to really, you know, do something different? And you'll be surprised, a lot of the time, a lot of these sort of creative agencies that help the brands they just churn out the same ideas. So they need someone like you to go, what about this? And, you know, you never know. You never know.
It's true. I'm going to take you up on that.
Yeah. That's good
Let me
advice.
know.
Yeah. So just thinking now a bit more kind of beyond the issue of just females in sport, what would you say would be, if someone was sat here thinking, I really want to go into professional sport, and you could think of one thing that you'd been told back when you were starting out, what would you want someone to have told you, if that makes sense?
Oh, that's a really good question.
You might need a bit of time to think. I'm not sure.
I think I've touched on it already. You know, I was very much kind of the weird girl that played and is really good. And I really had an issue with it at one point, because I was like, I don't want to play anymore. Like, if I'm going to be this kind of person that people think is breaking the rules just because I'm a girl, I don't even want to play. So I actually played tennis for a bit, because the Williams sisters for me were sort of people on TV, and it was normality to me. So I would have loved for somebody to say, it's really cool that you're a girl, and actually it's not breaking the rules and it's not weird. I think that's obviously happened now, but I think in terms of just kind of, and it's not just in terms of sport, I think in everyday life, you know, Instagram is such a sort of, it's become sort of like the reference for a lot of young girls now, and they're seeing it as like, I have to be perfect, I have to look like Kim Kardashian, and actually athletes challenge that, because we are sort of, you know, got muscly, and we're different, and it's about saying, no, it's fine to look how you look. It's not, you don't have to look like the perfect Instagram models with you know, loads of filters, etc. So I think in general, you know, I think we all have a responsibility, parents, coaches, to empower women, young girls, and say, whatever you want to do, whether it's horse riding, football, rugby, tennis, whatever, it's cool. Like, it's really cool. I think, you know, I think sometimes coaches, teachers, peers don't help with that, and so girls just give up and say, I can't bother, because it just makes me feel really weird.
Was that something you experienced? Was there someone that kind of almost held you back?
Yeah, like, honestly, genuinely, I'd go to tournaments and I'd be the only girl in the team, and there'd be parents on the sideline complaining that I'm like, like, why is she playing? That's not in the rules that a girl should be playing. And I used to see that. And as much as I carried on playing, after a while it became sort of something I was like, I don't really want to be in that situation again. So, and they probably weren't aware. It's just that they'd never seen it before. Whereas now, it's probably not as weird to see girls playing football. I would like to think that doesn't happen anymore.
You would hope so.
Yeah.
What about you? Do you think?
It's mainly for me, it's more that's like I had a very sporty family that loved doing sports. So I think in that sense I only got lucky because of my siblings did it with me, that I didn't really care about what everybody else said. But I wouldn't say it was like easy, because I'm sure I did football when I was in primary school, and I could feel that kind of, oh, girls shouldn't be doing this and the other. But with running, it was very different. But well, then again, I did trampolining, and it was kind of the same. It was very male dominant, and women weren't as good. So, because we're not as good as the men, we're just not seen. It's like if you was a woman, you have to be that exception, and then when you're up there, you're the only person they would know. So, but growing up, I think just got lucky because I had siblings to support me throughout the whole process.
Yeah, okay. And in terms of something that you would have been told when you were starting out on your career?
Wait, sorry, what?
As in, like, if you were given a piece of advice when you were starting out as an athlete, what would you want someone to have told you?
Just that sport isn't just male-dominated. That was just probably the first thing you want to hear. And, like, what men can do, women can do better, which I most definitely believe we can. So
Definitely.
if someone had told me that, I think I would have followed through, which I have anyway, because I have a great role model, and that's my mum. So the fact that I've had her alongside me, she's told me in ways like, people may tell you no, but you are strong enough and you are better. So if I'd listened to everyone when I got injured throughout my, when I broke my leg, if I listened to what they told me, I would never have made it. So all the negative energy that I've just heard from other people telling me, oh, you shouldn't do this or you shouldn't do that. I mean, I'm a grown woman now. It's like I do what I like. But growing up, I knew what I wanted, and no one just telling me just because I'm not good enough or I'm a girl is going to stop me.
Yeah. So you just mentioned that you've got siblings. Do you think the sibling rivalry kind of made you more competitive?
I was better than them anyway, so it's okay.
Fair enough. Okay, so a bit of an easier question now. If you had one inspiration in sport, who would it be?
I
mean,
say
I have a
Serena
few.
Venus, you know.
Maybe not an easier question.
Serena Williams is
Yeah.
the
Okay.
first name that comes to my mind.
Yeah.
Because that woman is just, she's like from another planet.
Have you met her?
No, but she's on my list massively, and I will massively fangirl too when I meet her.
Fair enough.
Yeah, Serena Williams, I think, she's just one of the greatest. She's the great. Yeah, she's in terms of women's sports, certainly. I mean, I watch men too, and I think you make a great point that, you know, we can learn a lot from men too, and men can learn a lot from women.
Yeah.
I think that's also become a dynamic that's been really positive. Like, as I said, you know, I see the Chelsea guys all the time, and they're always like, oh, we're coming to your game, and you know, and I think they learn a lot from us, and vice versa. Like, we watch them a lot too, and you know, so in terms of men, I love Lionel Messi, big fan of him,
Yeah.
and yeah, I'm really a big fan of Usain Bolt too, because I just think he's just like unconventional, like he's just himself, and
There always seems to be an
Yeah.
aspect of almost attention seeking to it, though. Maybe I'm just skeptical,
but you know that's
don't
part,
know.
but that's part of entertainment. You know, I think
I
I think
suppose.
sport is also entertainment and should
Yeah,
be entertainment.
yeah.
And I think sometimes as athletes we're so serious and we're like straight faced, we can't smile. It's like, no, we're actually here to entertain.
Yeah.
And I think that's what he does. I get it, like it's very much ego and, you know, the whole kind of, but it's trademarking. It's smart because he engages kids in a way where they're doing it on the playground, and you know, they're kind of relating to it all, and it's entertainment. It should be light sometimes, lighthearted.
So do you think professional athletes or like sportsmen in general have a responsibility to kind of encourage children to get involved in sport?
Most definitely.
Yeah.
Because it is, I say a lot about social media because we see these people on television. So it's like, when I grow up, I want to be like this person.
Yeah.
So when I grew up, like, if I was watching Serena Williams, I wanted to be a tennis player. But my mom never put me in tennis, so didn't get that opportunity. But when I saw it on TV, it's like, I want to grow up and be her. And that's where it all started. So when I even started track and field, I got to know Christina Hugu as like an actual person. As she's my friend, I have her number, and like I wanted to be her because she's just amazing.
Yeah.
And it's like, because I see that, I want to be that. And I feel
Yeah.
like if you watch TV now, you'd feel like if you did like some really good tricks on a football pitch, it's like, oh my God, I want to do that. I'm going to go and learn how to do it. So that's how the thing is, or how it is right now.
Yeah, I take that particularly seriously. You know, as an athlete, we are role models whether we like it or not.
Yeah.
And you know, kids, particularly young girls, as I said, now look up to us, and it's not about, you know, trying to be a perfect human being, because we're human beings as well. But it's about saying, actually, we're in a privileged position to inspire other people and inspire young girls who will make a decision based on your behavior. So I think that's really important for athletes to kind of take that on board and see it as a privilege, see it as something that's good, and you should sort of take on board.
Do you do any coaching?
No, I don't think I'm patient enough for coaching.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not patient enough. Sorry. But I'd certainly like to, when I'm done playing, I'd certainly like to work on the business side of football. So basically be at the sort of decision-making level.
Okay.
Where, and I think this is something that doesn't happen enough. There's not enough athlete representation at the decision-making level. So if you walk into a boardroom now at the Football Association or British Athletics, where are the athletes? Like, athletes should be informing that conversation. So I'm really keen to use all my experience to be able to say, you know, to the CEO or the chief executive, no, this needs to be the decision because that's going to affect the athlete in that way. A lot of these decision makers never kick to football. How does that make sense? So I would rather do that than sort of coach on the field, and it's just not, I don't know, I've tried it and I was just I was like, it's not me.
Yeah, no, I
It's
can
not me.
sympathise.
Yeah, I think because like, I'm so used to playing and doing it myself that like when it's not done properly, I'm like,
Yeah.
it's just
Why is it not,
you know,
yeah,
it's just,
yeah, very
it
true.
just, yeah, it didn't work for me at all.
Do you have any ideas about what you'd want to do after being an athlete?
I'm still struggling. I think I might go, I studied drama, so I might go into that direction when I finish, but probably
So
not
did you used to
coaching.
act then? Or?
I went to like drama school outside of college at the time, but
Yeah.
not so much. I didn't follow through just because sport just took up a lot, a lot of my time. But I thought when I finish, I would probably have time then, so I'll probably do it when I finish.
Yeah. So if you had one moment in your life that kind of you remember, like a sporting moment that you remember above all the others, what would it be?
Mine would be when I broke my leg the week after my birthday, only because when I look back at that moment, I realize how far I've come, and I know how strong I am, and all the battles I've had to, just all the mountains I had to climb all by myself. And like your parents could help you so much, but you're the person physically doing all the hard work. And the fact that I did that at such a young age, battling with just being so sporty and that just been taken away from me within seconds, that I realize how strong I am, and I know how far I can go. So when anyone tells me, oh, well, actually, you can't do this, you can't do that, I've broken a leg, I'm good. So that's
like a
how I
reference
see
for
it.
you.
Yeah.
So we've actually got our final speakers. So if we wanted to give her... Hi. Right, so for everyone, this is Maggie. She is a rugby. Do you want to actually introduce yourself?
Okay, I'm a rugby legend. Yeah, so rugby player, I used to play for the England women's rugby team. I'm now a sports commentator. I talk on TV about women and men's rugby. And I also write a column for the Daily Telegraph. So that's what I do now.
Perfect. Okay, so that actually touches on something we've been talking about, which is the area of sport as not just sport, but also entertainment. And I wondered, do you have any kind of, having seen that from the other side and like commentating, is there anything that you think about now that you hadn't necessarily thought of when you were playing rugby?
Yeah, one of the biggest things I think as athletes is that you just play your sport and you enjoy it. One of the things I always have to say to athletes now is think about your career post-playing. So you've seen a lot of, especially in the rugby world, you see a lot of them now, they're very smart when they talk to the camera because almost they're setting themselves up for when they retire, they can be commentators and pundits. You know, the ones who are a little bit cheeky, you're like, oh, I want to listen to them a bit more often. And I would probably say, coming into the entertainment world now, it's a little bit different. It's cutthroat. You know, when you're an athlete, you've got to be the best to get that position. But in the world of media, it's very much like you might not fit the part, you know, which you've been asked to sort of do as a commentator or pundit, and there's someone else who'll come along who's a little bit different, who has a bigger name than you, and they take that spot. So it's kind of, it's very cutthroat. But I guess that's why I love the challenge. It's almost like being an athlete. You have to work hard to keep in that spot, really.
Yeah. And would you say, do you commentate on rugby?
I do, yeah.
So
I'd love to commentate on football and athletics, but I haven't got a clue.
That must be quite male-dominated as well. Do you think?
Just a little bit.
Yeah. Is that, like, obviously we've been talking about kind of women in sport and kind of gender inequality, but is that something that you think is being rectified also in the media aspect of sport as well as what's been going on within sport itself?
Yeah. So to start off with, the entertainment industry is very male-dominated. You know, what you see a lot of female athletes obviously on the pitch, on the court and all that, but what we're not seeing a lot of is a lot of women in front of the camera, behind the camera, you know, as directors and producers. Even in the world of journalism, that's what I've kind of gone into a bit. And, you know, we still need to improve on that. I think there's been a real cultural shift. I think people are starting to appreciate there needs to be more. There needs to be greater diversity in the broadcasting media industry. You know, you get a mix of people saying maybe a lot of women don't want to do it because it's you know, you're putting yourself out there. And I actually disagree. There's a lot of women who want to do it. A lot of women have the expertise to do it. I think sometimes the opportunities aren't always there. That's usually where the challenges are. You know, I've been very fortunate. I've pushed my way through. I know Ennie's been doing a bit. I know when you retire, you can do a bit. And the thing is, when you're there, you've got to work damn hard to make sure you're in that, I guess, in that role, and that you keep yourself in that role. Because not a lot of companies want to work on quotas. It's not about that. It's actually, are you good enough to be there? And if so, you've got to show it. And I research so much to make sure that I know everything about my sport.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good point, that, you know, there is a big conversation about sort of gender equality and more women in boardrooms, more women in media, more women behind the camera, in front of the camera. But we've got to be very careful not to just put women, you know, sort of there just to tick the box.
Yeah.
They have to be good enough. And as athletes, we know that. You know, you have to be good enough. Fundamentally, you have to be good enough.
And do you think it's a mixture of saying, actually, you have to be good enough, but maybe just take the risk? Is there an element of that?
Yeah, and I think a lot of women coach themselves out of an opportunity because they think they can't see anybody like them. So women are guilty too of saying, oh, actually, I'm not going to go for that job because a man's going to get it. Well, no, unless you go for it, you're not going to know. So it is about sort of changing mindsets as well.
Don't they say, like when it comes to job descriptions as well, don't they say a woman and a man will look at the same job description and a woman will go, I've got that, I've got that, I've got that, haven't got that, or I'm not going to go for the job, where a guy will go,
I've got
haven't
it
got
all.
that, haven't got that, I've got that, I'm going for it. And actually, how do you change that mindset?
Yes,
you know,
it is, it is. But I think in the whole gender equality conversation, I've done a lot of these panels, and it is about, it's not about having a handout because you're a woman. It's about saying, how can we improve ourselves so when we get that opportunity, we're blowing everybody out the room. You know, it's a slight, and as athletes, we know what that means. You know, you've got to work hard, you've got to perform, you've got to be in that top 5 or top 10, so that when the coach is picking you, they're picking you.
So you say you're doing commentating now, but am I right in saying you did shot put at Rio? Is that right?
Sorry, I didn't get to Rio. This is a bit of a sore subject. I can't believe bringing it up. So I tried to get to Rio as a shot put thrower. So my sport was rugby union. I retired in 2015, and I thought, I can do this. I've got a year. I can really do it. And I was a shot put thrower before. I did a bit of that before. I worked very hard. I'm trying to explain myself. I worked really hard. I did it for a year, and I did everything I needed to do. I tried to get the right team around me to get me to that point. Just unfortunately, it wasn't as good as the best out there. You know, some of them, they're bigger than me. I could be their shot put. You know, they're bigger, they're stronger, they throw further. And but I did everything I could to get to that point. And sometimes I say to people, in life, there's nothing wrong with setting a goal that's a little bit out of your reach because you don't know what you can achieve from it. And actually, it led on to me getting contacted by ITV to be a pundit for the Men's Rugby World Cup, which I would never have got that opportunity beforehand. So it put me in the limelight, and they see, look, she's not afraid to take risks or step out of her comfort zone. You know?
So having experienced first rugby, and then obviously, although you didn't go to the Olympics, you were still involved in the whole kind of athletic setup. Would you say that emphasised some of the issues with gender in rugby, or would you say that kind of that's improving so much that you didn't really notice much of a difference?
So the reason why I didn't succeed more for the differences is between athletics and rugby. I say probably the reason why I didn't succeed is I couldn't get used to being on my own. That was so hard. You know, so Annie knows, like when you're in a team, you've got like lots of people. You've got your coaches, you've got several different types of coaches. And then for athletics, I had my one coach, she was a lovely lady, but one coach, and there's only so much you can talk about EastEnders for. You know, we ran out of topics, and after a while, I found it really hard. So I think what you do see, when you see a lot of athletes changing sports all the time. I don't think you tend to see a lot of team individuals turned into individual sports. Team people go from individual sports. What you tend to see is individual go to individual because they've got that mindset where actually it's all about me. I wasn't used to going from, but actually things don't go right. It's not just me, it's everyone else, you know. Where in an environment where you're on your own, you're like, oh my God, it's not working. What am I not doing right? And I just couldn't get my head around that. But I'm glad I gave it a go. It helped me see the other side of it, really. But I absolutely love being in a team, really, I guess. And you know, it's just having the people around me I could get used to.
So are you doing, beyond like commentating now, are you coaching at all? Or?
No, I couldn't. No. I used to do a bit of coaching.
I
think the fact when you're coaching, you're so close to it, and actually you can't do anything about it. So if they mess up, you're like, oh my God.
That's what we were saying.
What are you doing?
Exactly what I just said.
And actually I found that I did a little bit of it. I worked for the RFU, the Rugby Football Union, for 5 years, and then I realised that this is something I can't keep doing because I found myself getting frustrated. But for me, broadcasting is quite a nice little transition. I almost like I'm a coach. I'm coaching the audience and analysing the game. And I can criticise players and not get backlash from it, you know. And then I do like writing column for Daily Telegraph is great because again I get to speak to athletes and I get to say my opinions, which is quite nice, and people read it.
Yeah. Okay, so does anyone from the audience have any questions? So if you wait for the microphone to come over to you, and then you can, we can get two out at the same time.
So you talked a little bit about doing things like commentating and the campaigns, like the This Girl Can campaign, and so kind of the media side of it. Where do you think kind of the next step for women's sport needs to come from? Do you think it needs to be driven by the media and actually giving women's sport that coverage, or do you think it needs to be driven by like the clubs, like the football clubs, going for things like equal pay, or do you think it needs to come from the national governing bodies? Where do you think that next kind of step forward for women's sport is going to come from?
I think that's a really good question, and a really it's a good question for a really complex issue. I think at the moment, particularly women's football, is in a really interesting situation. If you look globally, there is a lot going on in terms of equal pay, in terms of equal treatment. The Danish national team right now are on strike. They're refusing to play. You had the Irish Republic of Ireland girls saying, we no longer want to get changed in the airport toilets. That changed. You have Norwegian girls who have just achieved landmark equality in terms of pay. The men and the women in Norway are now paid the same, which is amazing. The US women's national team just won their lawsuit against the US Federation for basically that we should be paid way more because we do way better. You know, you have so much going on in terms of women's sport, and I think in answer to your question, I think it does need to come from the federations. I think brands are on board now. I think fans are on board. I think the players are more professional. I think what you have, and I touched on it earlier, is still at the decision-making level, really archaic decision makers who are not informed by athletes. So I should see the chief executive of the Football Association much more often than once a year or once every blue moon, because actually what he decides affects me directly and affects everybody else in the team. So I think it does need to be a standard across the board by federations to really put their money where their mouth is and take it seriously, pay. And it's not just about equality, because in the case of the US women's national team, actually equality would have meant that they were just being paid per game, and actually that's not ideal, because what happens if you get injured, what happens if you get pregnant? So actually it's about saying fairness. It's about, talking about a bigger piece of the pie that is fair, that represents what the girls are achieving. So I do think it is about the governing bodies now and making sort of high-level decisions in terms of governance that really set the tone for the rest of the world. Because Norway, for instance, now there's equal pay. Everybody heard about it. Now federations are saying, well, we want to do the same thing. So that's kind of, for me, the answer. I think everybody else is on board, but they're still lagging behind.
Would you agree with that?
I do, yeah. But I think just a bit from athletics, I do feel like the social media side does play a part. I do understand when you say about the federation should definitely push it and make sure it's known that women are just as good. But in the society that we live in right now, it's very much social media, and it's all about TV. So my cousins play for the England netball team, and only now they're just on Sky Sport Mix. At the end of you might say it's Sky Sports Mix, but at least they still made TV, and that is just a female-dominated sport. But it took them so long to get that far. I mean, they're not every game's televised, but they should be all televised. They should be following them around every competition they play, every game they have. But that's how I see it for them more. But for track and field, I feel like they need to just really put women out there, just because the men are doing so much better, that they need to put a woman's face out there to know that women also do athletics and are just as good.
I think they both put it like eloquently. It's a mixture of a range of things will help bring women's sport into the limelight and progress it. And I think for me, it's media, definitely, that's going to be a huge factor. So I can only talk for my sport, really. You know, ITV covered the Women's Rugby World Cup. The final was shown prime time. You're a rugby girl, aren't you? I recognise you here. Prime time, 7:45. Get rid of X Factor and Saturday night. You know, and it had 2.8 million people watch it, which is brilliant. The athletics gets a lot of good coverage. Football, you know, the Europeans got a huge amount of coverage, and obviously the World Cup as well. So I think TV coverage is key. We need to keep pushing that. I mean, like, you know, I'm very fortunate to work with ITV. We keep pushing it. We keep saying we want to show more women's rugby stuff or women's sport. I think sponsors have a huge part to play. You know, we saw with rowing, women's rowing got, I guess, the airtime that it deserved because, was it B&N Mellon, the sponsors, they pushed it. So the CEO, Helena Morrissey, she was the one who's saying, why aren't the women getting the same coverage as the men? And why aren't they rowing on the same, you know, water as the men? So that makes a big difference. And one of the big things I'm a backer of is there needs to be more women in governance. You know, there needs to be women in some of those serious big roles. You know, I'm on my RFU council. There's 3 women, 63 men, I think. Or maybe less than that. I can't remember. There's lots of men on that team. So, you know, 3 women, and what's really positive. I'm very fortunate in our governing body. We are working really hard to get more women on board, not just on the council, but also on the board. And Sporting have pushed. I think it's the sports code where there has to be 30% women now on boards and councils. So I think that's where the big changes are. But I also, as part of me, it goes, I always throw it back at the athlete. I think athletes need to work really hard to keep pushing themselves. You know, Amy, I have to take my hat off to you for what you've done. Like, I'm so proud of you for what she's done, because I think actually it shows that more athletes have such power to make change. And we can't just always rely on the governing bodies, media, sponsors, to create change. Sometimes athletes have to speak out, because if it's not happening for you, talk about it, and you've got to do it whilst you're competing as well.
They're the only brave ones that will do it.
I know, and it's hard, but when you're in it as well, it's really hard to speak out. You know? But sometimes, like, I think what Enni's done, you've sort of created this chain now, and I think you'll see more people.
Well, I mean, I think in terms of my case with the FA, it certainly was not something I wanted to sort of come across as speaking out. You know, I was actually just trying to privately deal with something that I thought was wrong. But actually it's turned, hopefully, into a conversation for change. I think the problem is that athletes look and stand back and go, well, if I speak out, I'm going to lose my career. And you've got to flip it back and then say, well, why is that? It's the governing body that is sort of creating that kind of environment. So I completely hear you. You see the movement now with Colin Kaepernick, what he's doing, and what, you know, how that's sort of spread across athletes and around the world. But the athlete fundamentally has to be protected, you know, in terms of, particularly when you're still playing. It's easy when you've retired because you've got nothing to lose. When you're still playing, it's like you're putting everything on the line. And that goes back to the point where if you're on the board, your voice is already, if you like, accepted. You know, you shouldn't have to necessarily speak out in sort of controversial way.
So we had another question at the back, I think, if you've got the microphone already.
Hi. Thank you all very much for coming to speak, first of all. My question is for Enni. I think it's genuinely inspirational, everything you've achieved, not just on the pitch, being top scorer last season, but also what you've had to put up with the past few months with regards to the racism scandal and the unbelievable way you've been treated by the FA. Mo Marley, England manager, recently said she'd 100% pick you based on merit for the next England team. And I wondered, given the way that the England women's team celebrated in the last match against Russia, all running to hug Mark Sampson, would that be something that you would consider if the choice arose? And also with regards to that, given that the last England manager was a Welsh man, do you think the next one should be an English woman?
There's like 5 different questions. It's something I'm still thinking about. I think to be honest, you made a point about it being on merit, and I think I touched on it in terms of, you know, women on boards and women getting opportunities. I would hate to be in a situation where I'm being picked because people feel sorry for me, or, you know, it's kind of a political statement, or, you know, it's... so I think I've got to get back to the point where I feel comfortable that, you know, I'm playing in a position where I'm getting the stats, I'm getting the objective stats to say I'm comfortable going back into the team. I think everything else around that, again, is a conversation I think should be facilitated by, you know, the coaches, the managers, the FA, because in a situation like this, no one's ever been through it. So people have done different things, said different things, acted in a certain way, and people get very upset, including me, including myself. I've not been 100% perfect. I've got emotional and angry at times as well. So I think conversations need to be facilitated around that when you are in a team environment and people have so many different views. A lot of people love the manager and, you know, want to show that allegiance. Some people want to stay neutral. Some people don't say anything at all. I think in terms of athletes, we've kind of been put out in the cold in that sense, in not knowing how to deal with a situation where one individual is you know, talking about certain behaviour and the team don't necessarily know how to handle that. I think there needs to be coaching around that, so if it happens again, it won't be so polarising and so divisive. And your third question, what was the third question? Yeah, I think, you know, at the top level with the national team, and I think it goes for any sport, it is a really privileged position. And I think we've got to be really careful to say just because it's women's sport, it has to be a woman. I've had really good female coaches. I've had really bad female coaches. I've had really bad male coaches. I've had really great male coaches. So it's about the best person for the job that has an understanding of working with women, female athletes that naturally are different to male athletes. An understanding of communication, an understanding of how to motivate, how to work under pressure, all the things that are important for that position, which is ultimately a hugely privileged position to be managing the England national team. So I would say it's the best person for the job, and I think a lot of the candidates will be male, a lot of will be women, so we'll have to wait and see.
Perfect. Okay, have we got, yeah, do we want, there's with the glasses? Thanks.
It's like question time, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, so my question's about media, so both in sport and in kind of commentating. Have you yourself noticed, all of you, increased focus on your appearance and your body image as a woman in sport? And do you think it's had a negative effect on you and your own self-image and your kind of ability to take part in sport feeling unjudged?
To be fair, I don't think I've ever taken a picture of me running in action. My face always looks really bad.
Action face.
No, you're like, it's okay. But our image is always going to be out there. They always want the best, the best looking person, one who's got, just stands out better from the rest. But I don't think for track and field it's a big thing about how we look. It's, to be fair, who's got the best smile, I think, who can speak the best, honestly, when it comes to our athletics. No one really does worry about how we look, because at the end of the day, I'm a sports person. I'm going to look a certain way. I'm not going to look like your average model or someone that walks down the street. So we really have a certain look in general, but not so much that we're judged upon it, I don't think, not in track and field.
I think actually it's been a positive change. I think now, I think I touched on it earlier, talking about sort of Instagram models now, and you know, the sort of Kardashian era where young girls are sort of seeing them and thinking they need to look like them. No offense to the Kardashians, you know, I think they're beautiful women, but there are different shapes and sizes of women, and I think what's happened is the more women's sport becomes sort of mainstream, the more people are going to see different shapes and bodies, muscly women, women that are okay with having big bums, you know, whatever it may be. And again, it sort of changes the perception. And so young girls now go, oh, she's really, you know, she's really pretty. And actually that prettiness is completely different to what it would have been before. So I think actually female athletes are really have a positive part to play in that, because as Asha said, we have always been different in terms of the way our bodies are, the way we have to train, and and I think now people look at female athletes and go, oh, I want that six-pack, and oh, she's got a really nice hair or nails, and we've become sort of more of a positive reference than sort of the typical, the typical idea of beauty, if you like.
I mean, when I was playing, we got judged massively. I have always had muscle, big strong biceps, and massive thighs. And I remember when I was young, people used to be like, oh my God, you've got massive thighs. And then I'd go into rugby and they're like, oh my God, you've got massive thighs. And the shift in attitude has changed massively now. People do go, wow, she looks strong. Like when you're running, people see it and go, oh my God, she looks strong. When you're going for the ball, people look, oh my God, she's going for a tackle. And I think that's what's changed. The attitude to how we look has massively gone from this, doesn't look that right, to now we're seeing more women on TV that actually it's becoming normalised. And it's funny, my England team, we won Sports Personality Team of the Year back in 2014, and we stood up on the stage and we all wore the same dress, and people were like, oh my God, you look like you're part of a choir. But what was really interesting, they said that in a way because we all look different, and for the first time people were like, oh my God, some of you are a bit big, some of you are a bit muscly, some of you are really tiny, one of you doesn't have hair, it was all that, it was a range of us, and it was so nice because people stopped and looked and thought, athletes come in different shapes and sizes, but they're still good at what they do. And I think that's what's happened now. We're starting to see a massive shift in people's attitudes to female athletes, and like I said, because more of us on TV, there's a greater diversity of role models for young people to look up to.
Okay, do we have, other side?
Before I ask my question, can I just say to Annie that I think I can speak for everybody in Cambridge that we have been and will continue to stand in solidarity with you at this time.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I appreciate that, thank you.
My question to everybody is, if you were in charge of the governing body for each of your sports, what would be the one policy change that you would bring in today to improve women's participation in sport?
Equal pay. Simple answer, yeah. Well, I mean, it's not a simple answer, but I think, jokes aside, I think certainly the parity level could be much better in terms of contracts, between male and women's football. So that's certainly something I would try and address, because I think it affects so much, in terms of women being able to say, I don't have to work necessarily 2 days a week to sort of make up and pay my mortgage. I can, live comfortably, train just like the men do, and sort of, not worry too much. I think there are still a lot of worries in women's, am I going to lose my contract? That kind of threat all the time, that financial threat, because we're just not, paid enough. So I think that's what I would try and address, because these governing bodies have a lot of money. They have a lot of money.
Mine would mainly be like in-house, only because when I look at the tier, you have a performance director, and then you've got, we call them like the minions underneath anyway, but they're all men, and even our therapy staff, the majority of them are all male. And I'll never forget, it was my first ever senior championships in 2011. We was all the way in South Korea, and I had like not a female problem, but I wanted to talk to a woman about something, and I ran into the therapy room and I was like, have you got women doctors? Can I talk to someone? And we only had one therapist, and she was a massage therapist. It's not saying like that wasn't as good as an osteopath or a physio, but it's the fact that there was only one. And I literally panicked. I was like, I really need to talk to someone. Can I talk to you? I mean, she was lovely, but the fact that she was the only one really did kind of upset me. And I'm more of the cheeky one anyway, so when I am at the track, I do say, oh, where the women at? Or I just say, throw in a little spanner here or there. But they was looking, oh, but Asha was touching before, like, oh, women don't apply for this or whatever, but you can find one if you really wanted to. But to me, I feel like it is a bit of a problem, just because we've had a change of doctors as well. Our main doctor left, and he went to the England football, actually.
Oh,
and
really?
Chuck Verty.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he came from track and field, and we have another doctor that was underneath him who's now the main doctor, but they just employed another male doctor and got rid of the female that we had. I was like, okay, so we're still here, guys. But, you know, that's where I think I would want to change, is definitely in the staff, because it's very male-dominated. Even when it comes down to the coaches, we only have a handful of women coaches, and they're not really that respected.
A bit of both, really. Definitely professional contracts. So before the Women's Rugby World Cup, it was massive in terms of the fact that they said the 15s players weren't going to get their contracts renewed. So those who do sevens rugby will get full-time contracts, and everyone else has to go back to full-time work. And I think that really highlighted the fact that ideally what we want is that equality. Look, the money's never going to be exactly the same as the guys, but professional contracts for the athletes is almost, to me, a bare minimum. And the second thing is just more women in influential roles. You know, I want to see more women in the council, more women in boards, within the governing bodies. Not just, I'm not talking about my sport, because my sport's getting there slowly, but other sports as well. I think if we can get that change, you'll see it filter down to the lower end.
Yeah, I think a slight nugget to that as well is you guys. You know, I think what's really powerful with social media now is that everybody has a voice. So if I was in a position where I'm making decisions, I would have regular interactions with fans, you know, because one thing I felt in the difficult times is the level of support on social media. You just have to sometimes turn it on and you sort of say, oh, right, that person doesn't even know me and has made me feel better, just through sort of being interested and engaged. So I think everybody who cares about women's sport needs to kind of really share that voice and communicate, because when the governing bodies see it carried in the media, then they take it seriously. And that can only be done if people care about it enough. So I would really encourage everybody, you know, obviously you guys are here today because you're somewhat interested. Use your platforms to talk about women's sport, women's issues. There's so many great questions you guys have already come up with. Talk about it, you know, write about it in the, you know, university, varsity. Like, we all have a voice, and it's about really kind of making people aware that these are issues that can keep getting better and keep getting better.
Yeah. Okay, we've probably got time for one more. Yep, at the front. We can get the microphone. Thanks.
Who is it?
Yeah.
Hi, so thank you so much. It's been really great to hear so many different perspectives. My question sort of relates to something that we haven't really covered, because we've talked about the media's role and we've talked about the athlete's role and then post-athlete, the career after that. But what do you see as the role for the coaches in encouraging more women to get involved in sport? And sort of attached to that, do you think that men and women are, I mean, obviously they need to be coached differently because we have different natures, but do you think that women are coached differently to men in a detrimental way? And do you think that the men may be coached in a way that could benefit from perhaps being kinder? I don't know, it would be interesting to hear your perspectives, having been on the professional side of that, I guess.
I'll let you guys go first, 'cause I think of that.
For women coaches, we really have, I could say, a handful. So I used to be coached by a female before I moved to a male coach, and they'd always complain, oh, she's this, she's that, she's loud, and the fact that she brings her kids to the track. And for me, as a woman, I feel that was quite harsh. I mean, her kids are perfect. When I mean they are like, when I want kids, I want to have these two because they are just really good girls. But she wasn't respected just because she brought them to the track. Whereas a man, you can leave the kids at home or find someone else to look after them. Whereas she was attached to them, not attached. She didn't have the help to put them elsewhere. So for me, I thought it wasn't right the way how she was treated, and that people used it against her to lose her job when she used to work for British Athletics, and I feel that was harsh because the kids, they weren't going to trouble anyone. Honestly, if you just put them in the corner, they would read their books, and they're just so innocent and they are perfect. And to see how she was treated just because she brought them to the track, people say, oh, you shouldn't bring kids to the track, it's this, it's that, it's unprofessional. It's like, no, I bring my niece to the track, bring my nephew if I could. Like, if me as an athlete, if I didn't have a problem, why is it your problem? And I feel just because of that, it's difficult for women to get into it, just because they feel like they aren't respected. If you look at all the top athletes, all their coaches are male. And it's like, they don't get as good respect as a man would. Even though they could have the best athletes in the world, a man might talk to you and he's like, no, I think I can get you better to do this, whatever, whatever. But really and truly, she is a good coach. But we just had our differences. That's the reasons why I left. But I respected her just for how she handled the situation, and she was good about it. She didn't like throw her toys at the pram or whatever. She still carries her kids to the track, and they're still just as good as I last left them.
I would say in football, as I said before, you know, I've had really, really good female coaches. I currently have a great female coach at Chelsea. I've had really bad ones. I've had really good male coaches. I've had really bad ones. I think a lot of men now are getting into the women's game as sort of like a platform to get to the men's game. And as a result, that's pushing a lot of females out who would ordinarily have got those roles. You know, I remember speaking to a male coach years ago, and he never put the fact that he was a coach of the women's team on his CV because he was too embarrassed. He felt it would like degrade his CV, but he was like their coach for 10 years. So it's this thing of like, are male coaches dedicated and committed enough, then a women's coach would be in the same position? Or are they using it as a platform to get eventually where they need to get to? I think sometimes that is the issue. In terms of the sensitivities of coaching men and women, I think we are different. You know, men are different from women. And, you know, without sort of stereotypically talking about women and men, I think there are nuances to that psychologically coaches have to learn on a sort of more advanced level how to talk to women, understand women's issues. You know, Ashley, you touched on it, but a man who researches periods, who researches, you know, how women can perform depending on a period, could have a good conversation if they were informed. But they don't bother doing that because it's like, oh, it's a female issue.
Oh my God, can I just tell you one story though?
Yeah.
Sorry. My coach, the first time I told him, I was like, Steve, like, Mother Nature's kicked in, this is my first time. He took a step back and was like, oh my God, like, you're not going to catch it for Christ's sake. But that was the first time he'd ever experienced. Yeah. Like, I think I was like his first ever female girl that he thought, oh my God, she's got a period, okay, what do I do? Like, he started to panic. And I was with my SSC coach, and he knew exactly because he's spoken to women about it before, but he was just like, I'm going to run away. I don't know what to do. It's like, oh, for Christ's sake.
Well, that's the point.
Yeah, like,
that's the point.
He literally took a step back. Like, I was going to give it to him, and there you go. Honestly.
But that's an example. Do you know what I mean? That's the nuances. We are different. And it's not about saying, oh, you know, talk to women in a patronizing way. It's not about that. Because we are athletes, we are trying to be respected like the men. In the same way, we should be pushed, we should be criticized, we should be encouraged. It's about understanding women. Like, for instance, at Chelsea, we have a female coach, but all our staff, support staff, are men. She has said to all the male staff, you need to sit in to all our meetings about periods, because scientifically, women are more prone to injury when they're on their period. So that affects sports science, that affects the medical team, that affects nutrition. They should all be in those meetings. And so all of a sudden now, when we're talking about, when we're sort of feeding back to coaches and saying, oh, I'm on my first day or second day, whatever, it's a normal conversation because they're informed and they've been led to be informed. So I think more of that needs to happen in terms of men putting themselves in a position where they can understand women, because ultimately those are your athletes and you want them to perform. You need to understand performance and how they perform.
It's an interesting one, so I'm probably not going to actually answer your question, but so I've coached boys and girls, played with men, I guess. So I've been there and done both, really. And I think one of the things that I always find quite interesting is that, because we talk about equality and we always want, the same. And I guess what people tend to question is, if you want equality, you want the same thing, then as a coach, should you treat people differently? And I guess maybe my experience is a little bit different. As an athlete, I never wanted to be treated like a girl. Right. Does that make sense? And this is difficult because I don't want to use the word girl or woman as a patronising thing. Yeah. But I've always wanted to be just treated as an athlete, and I don't want anyone to sort of like
differentiate.
Yeah, and that's my biggest thing. Maybe that's I guess as I've got older, I've become more of a feminist anyway. So I'm a bit like, I don't want to be treated any different to how you would treat the guys. And when I coach boys or guys, you know, I'm as blunt as I am to some of the women. And I guess what I want people to understand is that actually I'm trying to teach the game and not teach a gender. So it's really hard. As a coach, I'm probably going off the track a little bit, but as a coach, I always think, I just want to teach you to be the best that you can be at that position or in the sport, and not think I have to think about, because boys have issues as well, but boys things and girls things, I just want to think, actually, how can I be better at making you good at your position? But what I think coaches need to get better at is knowing the individual. That's my biggest thing.
Yeah, I think that's my point, that as individuals, as women, and I totally get your point, but by default, you are dealing with women. So if you want to understand the individual in terms of the individual athlete, who is a woman, is that not part of your coaching process? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like to understand that individual, because it may be that I'm in a really bad mood because I'm on my first day of my period. You need to understand that as a coach, because that, if I'm not training well, it may be for that reason. But if you can't have that conversation, then you're not doing the maximum for that athlete. So I think it's very nuanced, but it's just kind of the reality. You know what I mean?
Because you get into that discussion, do you, where you go, actually, women coaches are better coaching women because supposedly then. But do you know what I mean?
It doesn't translate like that.
But it could lead. But that's where I think the discussion could end up going, and actually people going, well, women can't coach men because women don't know where the men. So that's why I think so I totally agree with what you're both saying. I think it's just a grey area, isn't it? Because people might go, actually, well, because you know more about that, then maybe that's where you should be positioned. And I guess I totally disagree with that, and I think you both do as well. But you're right, it's about knowing the individual, and if gender is part of that, then actually recognising it, but still sort of coming at an equal sort of approach to it. I just waffled on for, I don't know what I was I just like...
That's fine. I think that's all we've got time for tonight. Sorry if we didn't get through everyone's questions, but I think it's been really great to hear from everyone, and we've had some marvellous insight on a massive variety of issues. So
thank you, Hattie. Come on, guys.
And just before we go, we have got the climate change debate tomorrow, if anyone wants to come and hear about climate change. It'll be at 8. Thank you very much. Thank you.